Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great panel of guests tonight. We have a number of women who have been negatively impacted by the war on drugs, with their family members being killed or facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. In one case, Richard Stacey, they just released for prison after 32 years on a triple life without the possibility of parole in Florida. But we have Stacey, Thies, Sharon, DuVal, and Anna Barrett. But first, as usual, we'll bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight is out of New York City. In 2013, I was the keynote speaker at the New York City Cannabis Parade, which is the first and a founding member of the Global Cannabis March that happens in early May across the globe, though it's been curtailed with the pandemic last year and this year. But they still went forward in New York City with the founding leg and addressing marijuana legalization supporters at the rally this weekend on May 1st. Was U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who celebrated his home state's newly passed cannabis law and said it's time to bring the fight to the federal level. Schumer said during a speech at the New York City Cannabis Parade and Rally on Saturday, "What we've accomplished in New York is just the beginning. We're going to transfer that energy to Washington, D.C., end quote. Schumer for months has signaled that he and Democratic colleague Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey and Ron Wyden here in Oregon intend to bring legislation this session to legalize cannabis nationwide, though the group has not yet revealed their proposal. Schumer said at the rally, quote, "We're going to put forward advanced, comprehensive cannabis reform legislation that will not only turn the page on this sad chapter in American history, but undo the devastating consequences of these discriminatory and often bigoted policies," end quote. Schumer reminded the audience that he recently pushed state lawmakers and Governor Andrew Cuomo to support a state legalization law with strong racial equity provisions, such as automatic expungement of past marijuana convictions and priority licensing for people most affected by the war on drugs. Federal legalization, he said, needs to include similar provisions. Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, said of the nationwide legalization, quote, "We've got to do it the right way. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in communities of color and to provide opportunities for folks who've been hit hard by prohibition. Right now, somewhere in this city, hopefully, entrepreneurs are gathering together, thinking up a future marijuana business that'll provide jobs for New Yorkers and tax dollars to harmed communities," end quote. A number of other pro-legalization officials spoke at Saturday's rally, including lawmakers who supported the state's new cannabis law, as well as New York Attorney General Letitia James. Schumer said he expects bipartisan support for the federal policy change, noting that more and more Republican-led states have moved to the end prohibition. Schumer said, "We've got to support across the country. Did you hear about South Dakota?" He said, "Hardly a liberal bastion. They voted to legalize," end quote. Schumer did not provide an updated timeline for the federal legalization proposal. 2 weeks ago, he said it would be placed on the floor, quote, "soon," end quote. The Majority Leader also recently celebrated the cannabis holiday 420 in a Senate floor speech and in a tweet on his own Twitter page. On the House of Representatives side in the nation's capital, Judiciary Chairman Jerrold Nadler said he recently plans to reintroduce his own legalization bill, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement, or MORE Act, which cleared the chamber last year but did not advance in the Senate under Republican control. Our next story is from New York City. The majority of U.S. adults support legalizing the recreational use of marijuana in their states, according to nationwide polling data compiled by CBS News. 55% of respondents say they want to see legalization in their home states. Among those already residing in legal states, 60% say they favor the policy change. 59% of respondents also favor expunging the criminal records of those with past marijuana convictions. Few of those polled acknowledged being regular consumers of cannabis, and this decision appeared to be largely unaffected by the plant's legal status. 7% of respondents residing in legal states reported using cannabis versus 5% of those surveyed in jurisdictions where its recreational use remains illegal. The CBS poll is the latest in a series of recent national polls showing that most Americans believe that the possession and use of marijuana by adults should be legally permitted. This survey's margin of error is plus or minus 3.7 percentage points. In Paris, a French lawmaker caused a stir on Tuesday when he brandished a marijuana joint on the floor of the French National Assembly, denouncing the criminalization of cannabis and calling for a policy change. Deputy Francois Michel Lambert said prohibition, quote, is a total failure, and legalization would make it possible to dry up trafficking, create tax revenue, and create jobs, before showcasing a cup full of cannabis leaves on it and then pulling a joint from it. The deputy said, quote, other countries have chosen to face the problem rather than the ostrich policy of France, end quote. The stunt came one day before a multi-party parliamentary report was released advocating legalization of marijuana in France. Richard Ferrand, president of the National Assembly, immediately censured Lambert for displaying the joint and raised a point of order that means the lawmaker could face a financial penalty. Things went over differently in Mexico when a lawmaker gifted a joint to Interior Ministry Secretary Olga Sanchez Cordero on the floor of the Chamber of Deputies in 2019. A top Mexican administration official was gifted a cannabis plant by a senator on the floor of the Mexican Senate, and she said she'd be making it a part of her personal garden. Cannabis made another appearance in the Mexican legislature last August when Senator Jesus Rodriguez of the Morena Party decorated her desk with a marijuana plant. Our next story is out of Mexico, and it's our last story tonight. Mexican lawmakers have failed to meet a Supreme Court deadline to end marijuana prohibition after spending months going back and forth on a legalization bill that passed both chambers of Congress in differing forms. The result is a lot of uncertainty. The court first deemed prohibition unconstitutional in 2018 when the Mexican Supreme Court ordered legislatures to enact a policy change. And while there's been progress in drafting and advancing legalization legislation in the years since, the senators repeatedly requested deadline extensions that the Mexican Supreme Court granted. This session, it seemed likely that reform would finally be achieved. The Senate approved a legalization bill late last year, then the Chamber of Deputies made revisions and passed it in March, sending it back to the originating Senate chamber. A couple of Senate committees then took up and cleared the amended measure, but leaders quickly started signaling that certain revisions made the proposal unworkable. That's where the situation stood for weeks as the court's latest April 30th deadline approached. There was an expectation that the Senate would again ask the court for an extension, but that did not take place. Instead, lawmakers have begun floating the idea of holding a special legislative session just to talk about marijuana legalization after June's elections in order to get the job done this year. A friend of ours, Sarah Zapp, a legalization activist with the Instituto RIA and Coalition Regulation por la Paz, our Regulation for Peace, said, quote, we are in uncharted territory, end quote. She said that while nothing automatically happens on the court's end with the deadline's expiration, the body has 10 working days to make a general declaration about the unconstitutionality of marijuana prohibition in Mexico. One potential complication is that the court now has a different makeup with some of the new justices from when it first ruled to strike down criminalization in 2018, which was a full 3 years ago. Further court action would likely take place before a special legislative session, however, so what would happen in the interim is an open question. Drug policy reform advocates have also set up a year-long demonstration smoking cannabis and cultivating hundreds of marijuana plants in front of the Mexico Senate in Mexico City for over a year now. The police have allowed them to put up a fence, and they operate a gate, and people can come in and smoke marijuana peacefully, surrounded by hundreds of marijuana plants right on the Mexican Senate property. That's the end of our hemp news segment tonight. If you are a loved one or looking for a physician who can help you get a medical marijuana permit, we have a referral service. If you're anywhere in the United States, you can call us. at 503-235-4606. It's 503-235-4606. I would like to a couple of incredible people in Florida currently, a longtime activist and a relative of a victim of the drug war. We have Stacey Thies, who has been working with patients and driving the cannabis around the nation, and a drug war victim's relative, Sharon DuVal. Sharon, let's start with you. Tell us about your is it your brother?
No, it's my son that's in prison.
Your son. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so tell us what's
It's
going on.
because she looks so young, huh?
Yeah.
Go ahead, hon.
So tell us about your son.
Well, my son was, his daughter and his son was growing marijuana on his property, which they all had license and everything. So did my son.
And where was that?
In Petersburg, Michigan.
Okay.
And all the signs was posted and everything.
Was medical marijuana has been legal there since 2009. It was voted in 2008.
Yes.
I actually worked across the state of Michigan with doctors and registered about 25,000 patients in 12 cities across Michigan.
Well, my
Thank you.
my granddaughter and my grandson was growing because they had like patients to grow for.
Yeah.
And they charged my son because it was on his property and it wasn't greenhouses and everything was covered and no one could see nothing. But my neighbor turned him in for having plants growing. And the federal came out with machine guns and tanks and everything and busted through the yard and everything. And then he had to go to court and he was arrested and he got 10 years for the medical marijuana. He had like 21 eye operations, open heart surgery, kidney and a pancreas transplant, and a broken back, So he did have.
Before he went into jail?
Yes.
So when did he, I know there's usually a delay. When did the federal assault with the tanks and the machine guns happen? And when did he actually go to trial and have to go into prison?
2012.
Yeah, maybe 2012 he was raided.
Okay.
June of 2013 is when he had his self-surrender to prison.
Okay. So he's been in prison right now about 8 years.
Yes, he's been in for 8 years. We've done everything to try to get him out. Nothing has worked at all and stuff. And he kind of had a breakdown because he had a severe kidney infection. And with the transplant and everything, it went to his brain and he was hospitalized for a while, but he's just kind of lost it. So we're hoping we get him back.
Well, that's terrible. So you've been trying to get him released under the recent laws. So is he set for release? And did you say he had a 10-year sentence?
Yes, and they just moved him to a low security place in Ashland, Kentucky. But my son hasn't talked to me or his children in over 2 years. He just kind of gave up.
Wow. Well, that's terrible. So are you able to go visit him or?
No, he doesn't want any of us to visit.
Oh, well, that's got to be really terrible on you and his
children.
Yeah,
it is.
What does he have?
But they took his house. They took everything he had. And they held.
This medical marijuana was legal, but still the federal government came in and just destroyed his life, basically.
Yes. They held machine guns on me and everything, and I told them, go ahead and shoot me. I didn't give a crap.
There's an infamous video of Sharon when they came to raid. They had to go across her property to raid her family. And she is standing in front of the tanker, raising hell with them, like telling them that they're not coming across her land to raid her family. And, they did anyway, of course. But the whole like if you looked into the case, it was like such a bogus case. They used, like, they were following state law, but they used a state search warrant for a federal raid. So by the time that the case made it to the 9th District Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, the 3 judges were even confused on why Jerry was in prison and why it even made it that far, because it was obviously illegal. But they still didn't let him out of prison. They still didn't rule in our favor.
When was that appellate hearing?
That was, I think it was maybe the winter of 2014. Because I know it was cold. It was chilly in Cincinnati. So he had been in there like maybe a little over a year.
So now he's been in there 8 years, and he's had all kinds of these health problems that have caused some, you think, mental degradation. So are you writing letters to him, or?
I write letters to my son all the time, yes.
Uh-huh. And
I get no return mail from him.
I see.
The last letter I got from him, he says, Mom, I'll tell you all about it when I get home.
Okay.
So I don't know what happened to him in prison.
When was that?
That was probably about maybe, it's probably been 2 years on that letter.
Okay. Well, that's fairly recent. So his 10-year sentence is already less than 2 years away. Usually they move them into a halfway house. You know, I don't know if you know it, but I went through a federal trial, and I was fortunate enough to deploy jury nullification. And after the jury was out for 3 days, I was found not guilty of
Wow.
growing marijuana, and just found guilty of simple possession of a couple of grams. But
Wow.
and that's a long story, because I admitted I'd done everything I was accused of.
Right.
You can read the story out there on the internet. But
Okay.
So your son, did he go to trial, or did he take a 10-year plea bargain offer?
No, he said he really wasn't guilty, so he went to trial. And
Great,
I got one letter from one juror,
it.
and he said that he didn't want to say he was guilty, but the other ones all talked him into saying, that he was guilty. So he went through jury trial, and they all said he was guilty.
I see.
They didn't let us bring up what the marijuana was for or anything.
Right.
They wouldn't let him talk about any of that or any of his medical problems.
They won't let him bring it up, even if it is
Nope.
Jerry received a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence because of federal law, even though he was following state laws.
There's so many of our brothers and sisters that are locked up like that. And Stacey, I have to commend you for your work in helping so many of them. I know you've worked with a network of other people like Kristen Floor, who also has a family related horror story to tell. And you've got a lot of recent success stories to talk about in addition to that, Stacey. And you've got this Cannabis tour that you periodically get out there and do again. Do you have the Cannabis there in Florida?
We don't have it in Florida because I've been here in Florida helping the DeLisi family, because we did, he finally got out of prison. And during Richard's release from prison, Kristen and I were making LPP, the Last Prisoner Project, aware of Jerry DuVal. And recently they've made contact with the family, and that, adds a lot of hope to getting him out, because in like Jerry's case, you might say like, oh, well, he only has a couple years out, left. He should be out soon. But his health and, and the way that his mental state is, like, it's the sooner the better. And that's why I'm super hopeful and thankful that LPP has got interest in Jerry's case and is looking into seeing what they can do to get him out earlier.
So
to
Jerry,
happen.
how many children does Jerry have? I know
Just
Sharon,
two.
two. How old are they now?
Oh my goodness. You asked me that. I think
Huh.
Ashley's got to be maybe 35 or something.
I
And,
see.
and Jeremy might be 31, I think.
Okay. So
Yeah,
they've been adults
Close enough.
since all of this happened. They didn't.
it's
They
apparently
were,
for 2 years. Right, 2
oh,
years or
okay.
Five.
5 years. So Jerry, the
Under the
son,
same
went. He
federal-
already served his time for 5 years.
Because he wouldn't testify against his father. They wanted him to say that they were all his dad's plants. And he says, no, they're mine and my sister's. And since he wouldn't say that and go against his father, they also gave him 5 years.
I'm so sorry that your family has had to.
It was all
Go-
about his land, Paul. They were all about, even
That
though
is.
even
It's
though
all-
the son and the daughter were the caregivers, they worked everything and manipulated everything so it could be Jerry's. They didn't care about his health or sending the old man to prison. They cared about asset forfeiture and getting that farm. And that's what they did.
They took everything away from him, everything.
Yeah, that's always what it's about.
It is.
Stacey, it's always about the money. You know, here in Portland, the police would put a phone trap on a local grocery store back in the 90s and early 2000s, and they would know every call that came through. Then they would check the power bill. Then their main focus
Yes.
was, does that person own the house or have equity in the house? And they would target the ones that had the most equity. And those
Right.
they go after. If you were renting or that you were way down on their list, you know.
Yeah.
So it's always about the money, and that's what marijuana prohibition has always been about. You know, it was as our friend Gatewood Galbraith used to say, I always try to throw this in there when I can. It's the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate elite, fascist sons of a bitches that brought us marijuana prohibition. And
Amen. You do that very well. Gatewood would be proud.
it's I couldn't let that pass with Gatewood. You know, that was just too good a line. And so I use it every chance I get. And more than half the time I attribute it, you know. I don't always attribute it, and in certain circles I'll change the last. Instead of saying fascist sons of the bitches, I'll say crony capitalist ruling class.
Right, right.
A little bit, certain audiences. But anyway, Gatewood is a big inspiration for all of us. I'm glad to know, you know, you got to meet him there. So tell us more about the DeLisi case, though. How long was he in jail? And tell us how he came to be released.
Okay, so it's pretty magical because it was Jerry. So it's Jerry DuVal that inspired me to go to Michigan on the Cannabis in the first place, because he had been sentenced and there was a press conference for him. And that's why I rerouted we were on our way from Indiana to Illinois, and I went to Michigan instead for their family. And, you know, then there was a lot of advocacy work to do in Michigan. Well, in 2014, Richard DeLisi got a special hearing down here in Florida. And we did a journey for justice from Michigan down here to Florida. The judge was going to decide if he had unfair sentencing, like 3 life sentences for pot, if it was unfair or not. And the year before, Richard's brother, they were both sentenced to life in prison, you know, all of this ridiculous amount of years in prison for pot. And his brother had got out the year before. So 2014, Richard has this hearing and legalization is happening. Sanjay Gupta's coming out. Everyone thought Richard was getting out. So we did a journey for justice, thought we were going to be staying in Florida so we could pick Richard up in the Cannabis, you know, like all that stuff. And the hearing happened and they didn't let Richard out. And so that during that time is when me and his daughter, Ashley, who was 3 years old when he was sentenced and taken away to prison, me and her became friends.
Let me ask you,
And
how old is she now?
how old is she now? 35? Almost
So
35. Her birthday's at the end of this month.
So he was in prison for 32 years.
Almost 32.
So, and was it a state charge in Florida? Or
Charged
was it
in Florida. He spent a lot of his time in Barstow, but most of it in South Bay.
I see. Those are Florida prisons. I don't get to Florida.
Yeah,
but-
so it was all state time. So then, so we've advocated for him. When I first learned of the DeLisi story, his release date was like 2086. And,
wow.
you know, we talked earlier a little bit about my uncle, and, you know, the Kentucky State Police and a National Guard task force killed my uncle, and in front of my baby cousin when he was 4 years old.
I didn't know that, Stacey. I didn't know that at all. That's
you didn't
horrible.
know? I just assumed, you being so close to Paula and Gatewood, I just thought you knew.
Yeah.
Gatewood and Lynn Wilson were the first advocates on the scene when they murdered my uncle over 12 marijuana plants in Broadhead, Kentucky. And my uncle was a drafted Purple Heart Vietnam veteran who came back from war knowing a lot more than he did when he went in. And, you know, the struggles, you know, just like living fast and furious, and got in a motorcycle wreck and broke, you know, he already came back with shrapnel in his body, but then he broke almost every bone in his body, and was in a full body cast. And my family moved him back to Kentucky to the family farm where my great grandma and my granny could take care of him. And he always said that's where God had him, right where he needed him to be, in a full body cast, listening to my Aunt Mary Jane and my great grandma come and talk God stuff into, you know, to him. And so after he was like recovering and rehabilitating, he just stayed. Instead of going back to Ohio, he stayed in Kentucky on the family farm. And, you know, no more alcohol, no more pills. He started growing cannabis and felt like that was between him and God, what he does with plants and all that stuff. And lived a pretty private life. And as my uncle, like, he is one of my favorite people growing up. You know, he was always the one that made sense. It was always just fun and happiness, and, you know, at his place, and just chill. Like, the kids could ride four-wheelers and hang out and whatever. It had nothing to do with pot. You know, it's not because he let us smoke pot or whatever. It was all just good stuff. And then in 1993, they brought a helicopter. You know, it was blowing so low that it was like moving the trees, and he waved them down. And they told my uncle that they spotted the plants and they would have to come cut them down. And he said, over my dead body, I don't believe the way you do. And they got in the helicopter and they left. You know, it was like bullshitting across the fence, hands over the fence, just talking. And then they left. And what they left to do is barricade the road a mile each way, and brought in, I don't know, there's probably like 25 or 30 officers that surrounded the front. And there was 3 helicopters used, and part of a national drug task force was hiding in the tobacco fields and the neighboring property for 7 hours. So when this first started, my uncle immediately loaded up my Aunt Mary Jane and my baby cousin in the car to get them out of there. And it was the police that blocked the gates and said they couldn't leave. Well, then it was like in the 6th hour, Mary Jane tried to take Jake because things were getting more intense. The helicopters were coming closer and all this stuff. And Mary Jane tried to take Jake out the back door to go over the hill to my great grandma's, and she was again stopped by police. And
so they said, "Oh, you can't leave," or
they wouldn't let her leave, like go outside the fence. Well, 7 hours later, they, you know, in the 7th hour, they they didn't want my uncle for 7 hours. They didn't want my uncle close to the fence, even without any weapons. And then whenever they bring the helicopters and all this is like a war scene, going on, they demand him to the fence while my aunt is holding my baby cousin right next to him. And he picks up his assault rifle that he had and raises it facing the sky. And as soon as that happened, they threw concussion grenades in his face and filled him up full of bullets. My aunt was grazed in the head with a bullet, and Jake was covered in both his parents' blood. They didn't even know if they shot him. I add that detail because on the news, I was an hour up north living, and I learned from the news, and for the narrative that they were saying is police were forced to gun down a crazed Vietnam veteran holding his family hostage, protecting his marijuana crop.
Oh my God.
And so then it made sense on why they wouldn't let my aunt and Jacob leave that day, is all because it was all just so they could get away with murder.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They got away with murder.
That's crazy. And to say that they were holding him hostage, even though they weren't even letting him leave, it's just evil. It's so evil.
Right, and that's why my uncle had a problem with Vietnam. He was drafted. He wasn't a violent person. He wasn't a person that wanted to kill people. I mean, after 7 hours of everything they did, if he was about killing people, he would have done it,
Right.
If he was crazed or whatever.
What was your uncle's name?
Gary Shepard.
Gary Shepard. Okay.
Yeah, so 18 years I tried to stay in Kentucky, and about a year later, I realized that because I didn't realize that I thought it was just Kentucky. Kentucky had disgusted me. And so I took my daughter out of Kentucky to raise her in Arizona. And 18 years later, she graduated high school, the same year that we got medical marijuana in Arizona. So I ran off to Oaksterdam University. And it just so happened, how God magic works, but it just so happened to be the first weekend that they opened up the Oaksterdam Museum for students to check out. It wasn't complete yet, but they encouraged us to go check out what they had. And that's where I ran into Chris Conrad and Mickey Norris's Shattered Lives display with my uncle's memorial. It's the big memorial right in the middle of all the other stories. And that's where
I remember seeing it in Chris and Mickey's Shattered Lives display.
So you've probably read my uncle's story without even realizing it before.
I didn't realize he was related to you, and now I know.
Yeah, so I was reunited with my uncle 18 years later, learning that there's science and all the proof to everything he ever said about cannabis, not just the hippy dippy God's plan and miracle magic stuff that I believe, but everything else that he ever said about it. There was science and politics, all of it. And so pretty much since Oaksterdam, I've been, advocating. I went and got my cousin, who was all grown up in his 20s, made sure he came to Oaksterdam. And I learned a lot of the people that have been making waves since my uncle's murder were down at my family farm during the rallies at the court case. And so, yeah, it was important for my cousin to go. And then we started Cannabis and started just educating the public as much as we can. That led to the Cannabis, which led me to meeting Kristen and Anna, other drug war victims in different ways, wrapping my mind around, Oaksterdam in the Shattered Live display first opened my mind around that. It's not just Kentucky. It's the drug war is everywhere, they've killed people everywhere and they've hurt people's lives everywhere. And then meeting all these people made me realize that these families who are going through court and their people are in prison, they're suffering a lot of not only the financial burden, but the emotional and grief and trauma a lot of the similarities that my family has gone through since they killed my uncle. Maybe not the exact same, but a lot. And there was no amount of advocacy or enough change that could happen to bring my uncle back for me and my cousin. But we can get people out of prison and we can help those families get reunited and those love shock waves happen. So that's, I really incorporated a lot of the education into prisoner outreach and advocating for our people and their families, because in a lot of ways, the families, especially the children, they're imprisoned in a lot of ways. Like their opportunities and the lives that they could have been having and living are altered and different and shackled, when their people go to prison, not just our people they're sending to prison. It's like a whole family effect, and then whenever you're hurting these families, then that affects the whole world, and there's a lot of, pain and suffering that maybe we can't do much about, but oh my gosh, cannabis pain and suffering, like we can do something about that. And then cannabis helps so much other suffering out there.
Yeah. Well, that's the way I looked at it a long time ago, back when I was a teenager, that, marijuana was being used to imprison anti-war protesters, and it's just used, and it obviously was less harmful than alcohol, though I didn't actually conceive of it exactly that way and promote it that way. But it was obvious to me that that was the case, and we all said, alcohol is so much worse. But the fact of the matter is, I think cannabis is like a bellwether and a harbinger to tearing down this whole corporate structure that militarizes our whole world and corporatizes our whole world. So that's what motivated me to change it. So they couldn't keep using cannabis as a way to stop social change. And that's what I look at. I see that Anna has come in here. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Anna Barrett, and I fell 5 stories to concrete on my honeymoon in London in 1995, and luckily had the miracle of marijuana actually saved my life. And it was written up in the British Journal of Medicine, and met you as a result of trying to grow cannabis because I couldn't afford the $20 a gram weed. And so there's something that when I hear the corporatization, there's something that's so flawed in the very fabric of the corporatization of cannabis that just never sat well with me, considering I came from, meeting Chris Iverson on the run or having those really magical moments where people were actually wanting the greater good for the country, and it wasn't based on those corporate beliefs, but something more, something else.
You were involved in Portland's first medical marijuana club, right? That Chris Iverson.
Oh yeah, totally. I did. I mean, we had rallies. I think laws were made as a result of it. And I literally, you don't know this, but like I was telling Stacey this story. Like I remember we were going to court and we were pushing the issue. This is Switzerland thing, left us running this thing. We're like in trouble, running a club, whatever, just doing it. And
right. Chris went to Switzerland and left it behind.
It is sending into the worst. Well, I guess it was CBD, but I didn't know at the time.
Right.
And it was so beautiful. It was so green. It was so purple. It smelled good, but it didn't get you high. And I couldn't be in the Pacific Northwest running that operation and selling that to people. I couldn't do it, so I gave it away. And he was not very happy with me about giving it all away. But I thought it was sick people and they needed it, whatever. But one time we went to like our pretrial person in Multnomah County, and the guy pulled us in this tiny little side room, and he goes, "Well, Miss Barrett, the way we do things here in Multnomah County is we got 7 of you, and we do 1 win, 1 lose, 1 win, 1 lose. Y'all was up for a win, but Mexico, it looks mighty pretty this time of year." That's all he told us, and we were like, "Did we just get asked to leave Multnomah County?" And we were like so tired of getting in trouble. And then we had and there was all this infighting between just like the Diane Densworth and just like the little things that happen with the flawed starting of something where somebody just pops off to Switzerland like Chris does. But like, you know, but with the greatest good in mind and like the spiritual intentions of the alternative health center itself, having an Ayurvedic laboratory, having that kitchen, having that, it's just being a cool space, you know what I mean? It was too good. Anyways, yeah. So I like that you brought up, but the corporatization of cannabis makes me sick. I want to put hemp into heartivism. Heartivism being far out the, you know, non-monetary actions from your heart that create a rippling effect through society to cure the human condition. And I think after we get through this capitalization on cannabis, we can get to like the issues of like Phil Smith stop the drug war. You know what I mean? Like, when do we get there? That's all I know. But it's nice seeing you, Paul.
It's good to see you too, Anna. It's been a long time.
Thanks, Anna.
So, what's the next action in terms of Jerry DuVal? Is there any hope in moving his case in terms of getting released early?
So like I said earlier, Last Prisoner Project recently getting involved is a good step in the right direction. Also, the fact that he just got moved to a lower security place is a good step in the right direction. We're still praying that the family hears from him soon. And in the meantime, we're just going to keep advocating for him, and hopefully people can write him a lot of letters. We'll post his new address because it's in Ashland now instead of Lexington.
If someone wants to reach out to you and where you're posting new addresses and how to reach out and help patients who are there, send messages to Jerry DuVal or any other victims of the drug war who are still doing time in jail while the corporations are throwing people out of the industry. What's your website?
The best places to go are freedomgrowforever.org. My website, cannasensecampaign.org, has freedomgrowforever.org, links to candoclemency.org, and that's with Amy Povall. She's in the same book with my uncle, Chris, Shattered Lives. But she started, you're probably familiar with Can Do Clemency, so she helps through the clemency process and compassion release. And then we've been getting these letters like through Freedom Grow signed. These are just general letters. There's no organization on them, to the president. We did this the whole time that Trump was in prison.
We'll be there soon, I think, maybe. But
the whole time Trump was president, we were sending letters, and now we have a new one. It's really nice that we have an administration, like no matter who they are, we have an administration that said it. They campaigned on the promise that was one thing they were going to do, is end federal cannabis prohibition and set our people free. They said it in several different ways. I was paying attention during their debates and campaigns. So we're putting a sound bite together right now of all the times they said they were going to do it. And then in June, I'm leaving on the Cannabis. We're going to get more of these letters signed. And this one is just to the president. It has Gerald Lee DuVal's right here. And anybody can request me to send them the PDF to this so they can get these letters signed too. I get tons of them signed.
Do that. How will they ask you to do that?
They can email me at cannasense@gmail.com. And that's just CANNASENSE, like common sense, like your show, but Cannasense. And then I can send you a PDF. You can also get me on Facebook on the Cannabis Freedom Tour page or the Cannabis page or my personal page. Freedom Grow Forever has Cannabis pages too. But yeah, it's just a letter asking, it says politely, that we're politely requesting the release of not only these federal prisoners, but all of our federal cannabis prisoners. And that's why I had to leave the DeLisi family finally, after being down here in Florida with them since Florida, helping Ashley. We didn't talk about that, but 3 years ago, I mean, she's been on the bus. She's been advocating for her dad the last 8 years as much as possible. But 3 years ago, she was in a really bad car accident. And then during a surgery, she threw a clot and it paralyzed the right side of her body. So she wasn't going to be able to come for her dad's release. She was in an assisted living facility. And so I brought her down here. And
Right.
They started giving us like challenges and concerns about me taking her out of the assisted living facility because of COVID and stuff, and saying she wouldn't be allowed to come back there. Well, whatever. So we just figured out keeping her here close to her dad while her dad got off paper. And then that helped like manifest our 420 convets fishing tournament that we just had with Bobby Platshorn. He's the big tuna. He served 30 years in prison for pot.
Yeah, we had him on a few times.
Isn't he just a magical human being? I just like, I was always a fan. Of course, like traveling around on the Cannabis, like maybe like 2 years after traveling around on the Cannabis, the Silver Tour in Florida happened, and I was so thankful and proud. That's how I found about Bobby, is through the Silver Tour first. Well, then I learned more about who he was, and like, I just loved him as an advocate. And I've learned more and more about him, like more about him through Stephanie Landa and Bruce Perlowen, like, just over the last few years, just learning more and just like admiring him more. After working with him, like, like from the first start, like inviting him to be a part of an idea and him taking the idea and saying, we could do this and just like so great to work with, and all the magic and the shockwaves that happened on 420. I mean, you would be so happy, Paul. Like next year, we're going to have one every year. Everybody wants to have one every year. So so I know more people are going to come, and it's like, just like, I've always had, my uncle is a Purple Heart Vietnam, he was a Vietnam veteran. So I've made a lot of my work for veterans and in VFWs and at VFW conferences and stuff, and working with the prisoners. I've always, like, these are our cannabis war veterans. These are our war veterans here at home. I have changed the minds at VFWs when I have educated that we have war veterans from wars here at home. I have changed their mind. They have come to my side to believe, like, yeah, we agree. The guys that are in prison for pot are war veterans too, like, so having this boat tournament and having like the first big event that brings them all together and honors them and celebrates them as our cannabis war veterans was just magical. And I'm just thankful, because I think it's already the ripples and the shock waves that I was hoping for are happening. And that's why she was here, and I know she's staying connected to some of the other guys and veterans that she met on the bus.
I'm amazed to reconnect.
Inspirational, because I was so inspired. I was like, I want to hemp this, like hemp the homeless. These are things I want to do for my art. Hemp the homeless. I want to hemp this church. And I was like, God, it's so inspiring. Why can't they make like a hemp boat for these guys for next year? Like, why can't something cool go down? That's what I'm thinking.
And you guys just got off the boat there. You went out on a nice little boat tour out in the Gulf of Mexico.
I know. I was trying to. So Sharon's like 3.5 hours away from where we had the boat tournament at, and I was trying to talk her into coming, and she's like, "I'm not going to be able to make it." So then she was wanting me to catch her before I left Florida, so of course I have to make that happen. And she had a boat trip lined up for us when we got here.
All right. Right. I hope you guys had fun. So Stacey, you mentioned how the Last Prisoner Project has taken on Jerry's case now recently. How has your work with them been? I mean, I've read somewhere and that, some people feel that, a male dominated organizations come in and replace the female dominated kind of group. Are you guys working together well? Or do you feel like you've been slighted in any way, or
Yeah, that's a good question.
You know what?
what?
I feel so thankful because I don't care who takes the credit for what. I feel that I helped in all these love shockwaves and all the letters and all the postcards and all the phone calls. People are taking time out of their lives, out of their heart. And that's love energy. And that manifests people like Stephen D'Angelo to want, like when we first started, like they didn't want us talking about our prisoners, or they didn't want us talking about the dirty parts of the drug war. They wanted us to talk about the magic of medical marijuana and hemp and all that stuff. Like, don't keep that on the DL. So now, like, all of our efforts and heart, like Kristen Floor, who had to take her dad off life support shackle to a bed because he was following state laws, and federal laws are so behind the times.
Got to
That
work with
stuff is so insane.
Yeah.
These people's intentions and that's love, that's energy, that's magic. That is how we change things. That's how we end the drug war. We continue to help get these guys out of prison and make sure that they're able, like, they don't have no stresses and worries, and their families are taken care of. So when people like LPP come in and they are on freaking fire, and they are like, LPP got a hold of us at the beginning of, like, this time last year, and they wanted to know everything we knew about Richard Alisi, right? And we shared all that stuff. And guess what? Richard Alisi's out of prison right now. He's been fishing. He was on the boat with us. His daughter was with him. For 8 years, like, me and his daughter have been talking about the day we go to Florida and get her dad out of prison. And it's happened. So I love the fact that all of our hard work, all the way dating back to my uncle in Gatewood, and yes, we haven't been crazy hippies. We haven't been fighting and sacrificing times with our families and our lives for no good reason. This has been good reasons and magic. And now these guys that all got to meet each other and hang out on a boat and share that love, and all the women got to hug the people that they've been shouting for all these years. Like, oh, nothing can stop those kind of love shockwaves. Like, so we are on, I feel we are on the home stretch to ending cannabis madness, and I mean, that's how I feel about it. And the only reason why I had to leave, like, the Delices in Florida, I can't stay here forever, because I have to go get the cannabis, and we have to get more of these letters signed. Because some people just think these letters don't matter.
No, they do.
Again, it's energy. People that are stopping, taking time out of their day. And, I get to witness when people are signing it, they are saying, no way. People in life that's fucked up. Oh, I hope they get out. They are signing it, putting all of those intentions and stuff into that. So I'm all on that train, that all of this keeps everything flowing in the direction that we want to happen, So I appreciate Stephen D'Angelo, and I call him his 3 Charlie's Angels, because, Stephen D'Angelo's in the background, so I've, pictured a painting of a little speaker with a little hat and some little braids, and, his 3, Canna Angel lawyers, because Mary's got blonde hair, and Mariah has blonde hair, and Elizabeth has dark hair. So, they're the Canna Charlie's Angels, helping, show up when we're all help get Jerry out. And they're like, give us more information. We're on it, so
Right.
hopefully those things keep happening.
There goes a man. There goes
In
a
my
manatee.
opinion, it's a double-edged sword with everything, Paul. And just to be honest, there's always a corporate savvier eye watching those things happen with a different agenda. So that definitely even be the case. Forgiveness always be the greatest lesson. I don't know Stephen D'Angelo or what the real motives are behind it, so that you wouldn't want that information to be a part of your group at the beginning, and then suddenly you do. Maybe I've been in it a little longer from a different perspective than most. That's all I have to say. But power to like the greater good coming from whatever's happening.
Amen. Amen. Well, I really appreciate you ladies coming on here. So, do you have any other specific cases you're going to focus on now, Stacey?
Well, right now I am focused on going back to Arizona and getting the Cannabis ready, because we're going to tour her across the country to DC. This is going to be her last big run before getting a new bus. You'll be all proud. We're getting another bus to convert it all things hemp.
All right. And so
From
you're
the
going
flooring, the seats, everything.
That's why I said
you have a plan of when you're arriving in Washington, D.C.?
We are arriving in Washington, D.C. for the 51st annual Smokin' that started 51 years ago for the peace and anti-war, and we're all in this together, and it's all about freedom movement. A lot of people don't realize that it's been happening for 51 years, but it is, and it's happening this year, and we're on our way.
Well, I first went to my very first cannabis event was at the White House Smoke-In July 3rd and 4th of 1978. And that's where I was just a week after my 18th birthday. And that was my first big marijuana rally. And I've been at it ever since.
Thank you for your service, Paul. I was 2 years old when you were at your first Smoke-In in DC. That is badass.
Yeah, I've been doing it ever since. But anyway, I really appreciate it. So we'll put your websites up again.
Sensecampaign.org is my website. freedomgrowforever.org is, I'm a board member of freedomgrowforever.org, and that's all about our prisoners and all about advocating for our people.
All right. Well, I want to thank you ladies for coming on. First of all, a big thank you and our heartfelt appreciation that what you've done in terms of fighting for your family and fighting for freedom and justice for your family and spreading the love. And I really am glad we've had you on the show here today. I look forward to seeing you out there. And Shelley, Anna, Stacey, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us, Paul. I'm so glad that timing all worked out. We tried to catch up last May, like almost a year ago. We tried to catch up in COVID and
Portland right during the pandemic thing. But it's been a couple of years since we saw you at the Seattle Hemp Fest, where I saw you. You know. But anyway, see you next time down the Hempin' Road, and keep working to restore hemp.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.